He slid the divorce papers across the marble kitchen island with the same hand that had once wiped tears from my cheeks. $6 million. That's what his father left him, and somehow it erased me. "I think we've grown apart," he said, not meeting my eyes. His voice was steady, calm, practiced. $6 million, and suddenly the man who once swore he couldn't breathe without me was holding his breath like I was toxic. But here's what he didn't know. I already knew. I knew about the phone calls, I knew about the secret meetings, and I knew exactly why he thought divorce would make him untouchable. He just didn't know what I had done 3 weeks earlier. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. When Daniel and I first married, we had exactly $312 in our joint bank account. I remember because we laughed about it. We were sitting on the floor of our tiny one-bedroom apartment in Manchester, surrounded by IKEA boxes we couldn't afford to fully furnish. He pulled out his banking app, showed me the number, and said, "Well, at least we're rich in love." And I believed him. For 10 years, I believed him. We built everything from nothing. I worked double shifts at the hospital while he launched his tech consulting business from our living room. I edited his proposals at 2 a.m., fueled by cold coffee and stubborn loyalty. When investors rejected him, I held him. When contracts fell through, I reassured him. When his father refused to support his ridiculous startup dream, I stood between them and said, "He will prove you wrong." And he did. Slowly, steadily, Daniel's business began to stabilize, not wildly successful, but comfortable. We moved into a modest, semi-detached house. We bought a second-hand BMW. We started talking about children. Then his father died. Harold Whitmore was old money, the kind of old money that smells like polished oak and generational control. He never liked me, said I was ambitious in the wrong ways, whatever that meant. When the lawyer called about the inheritance, Daniel went silent. $6 million, transferred within 30 days. I remember the exact moment something shifted. It wasn't excitement, it was calculation. He started taking calls outside. He updated his wardrobe. He began correcting my grammar at dinner parties. The first time he said, "You wouldn't understand how this works," I laughed it off. The second time, it stung. The third time, I started paying attention. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who missed the signs. Women were writing things like, "The money changed him overnight," and "He upgraded everything, including me." That word, upgraded. I didn't want to believe Daniel saw me as something that could be replaced. But then came the dinner. He said it was a networking event, investors, old family connections. I wore my navy dress, the one he used to say made me look unstoppable. Halfway through the evening, I caught him watching a woman across the table. Blonde, impossibly polished, the kind of woman who looked like she had never assembled IKEA furniture in her life. Her name was Victoria Langley, daughter of one of his father's old associates. She laughed at everything he said, and he leaned in when she did. Later that night, when we got home, I asked casually, "You and Victoria seemed close." He didn't hesitate. "Don't be insecure." Insecure. After 10 years, after I carried him emotionally, financially, spiritually. Insecure. That's when the late nights increased, these strategy meetings, the sudden gym membership, the password change on his phone. And then, one evening, I saw it. He left his laptop open. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. I was bringing him tea, but the message was right there. Victoria, Once this is finalized, we won't have to hide anymore. My heart didn't shatter, it hardened. Finalized? Finalized what? The inheritance or us? I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I did something smarter. I called my cousin Amelia, corporate attorney, ruthless in the courtroom, soft with me. I told her everything. She asked one question. Is the inheritance already in a separate account? I said, no, it's being transferred next week. She paused. Then she said something that changed everything. Then listened to me very carefully. And that was 3 weeks before he slid the divorce papers across the counter. 3 weeks before he said, let's be civil about this. 3 weeks before he told me I would be comfortable with whatever settlement he offered. Comfortable, as if I were a charity case in my own marriage. But here's the thing Daniel never understood. I wasn't insecure. I was observant. And while he was busy planning his new life, I was quietly restructuring mine. When he looked up from those papers and said, I assume you'll sign without making this messy, I almost smiled, because messy was what was about to happen, and Victoria had no idea she was already part of it. He expected tears. That's the part that almost made me laugh. Daniel had always been uncomfortable with emotion. If I cried, he'd freeze, like a man who'd accidentally stepped into deep water and didn't know how to swim. So when he handed me those divorce papers, I saw it in his eyes. He was bracing himself. But I didn't cry. I picked up the stack calmly. 32 pages. Prepared thoroughly, strategically. He'd been planning this longer than I thought. I'll have my solicitor review it, I said evenly. His shoulders dropped just slightly. Relief. Of course, he replied. I want this to be smooth. Smooth. Like 10 years could be ironed out like a wrinkled shirt. I looked at the signature line where he'd already signed his name, bold, confident. Is Victoria aware? I asked. There it was, the flicker. Just half a second, but I saw it. I don't know what you're implying, he said carefully. I held his gaze. You should tell her to be careful with men who inherit money. It changes them. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. No, Daniel, I was being patient. That night he slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed, and stared at the ceiling, replaying Amelia's words from 3 weeks earlier. Before the inheritance transfers, she'd said, we need documentation, proof of marital contribution, emails, drafts, timestamps, anything showing you helped build his business. I didn't take a salary, I told her. Exactly. She explained something Daniel clearly hadn't considered. In the UK, inheritance alone is often separate property, but if marital funds or effort enhanced its value, or if it becomes intertwined with joint assets, it can shift. And Daniel was about to make a critical mistake because he didn't plan to keep that $6 million untouched. He planned to invest it into expanding his business, a business I helped build from the ground up. Amelia's voice had gone cool and sharp. If he uses inherited funds to grow a company that was built during your marriage with your unpaid labor, we have leverage. Leverage? I'd never thought of my loyalty as leverage, but suddenly it was currency. Over the next week, Daniel became disturbingly pleasant. He made coffee in the mornings, asked if I needed anything from the shop, told friends we were taking time apart amicably. He was curating the narrative. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence. Old email chains where I rewrote his investor pitches, bank statements showing my salary covering household expenses during his lean years, voice notes where he'd said, I couldn't have done this without you. I compiled everything into a secure drive Amelia had set up. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. Then came the gala, the official celebration of his inheritance, held at a private members club his father used to frequent. He asked if I wanted to attend. The audacity. "Of course," I said sweetly. "It would look strange if I didn't." He studied me like he was trying to decode something, but Daniel always underestimated me when I was calm. The night of the gala, I wore red, not soft red, power red, the kind that doesn't ask permission to enter a room. When we walked in together, heads turned. We looked like success, like legacy, like stability. Victoria was already there, in white. Of course she was. She approached us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Daniel," she breathed. Then she turned to me. "Oh, it's so good to see you again." Her tone suggested it wasn't. I smiled warmly. "Victoria, congratulations." "For what?" she asked lightly. I tilted my head. "For everything that's about to change." She blinked. Daniel shot me a warning look, but I'd spent 10 years mastering composure. I wasn't about to lose it now. Halfway through the evening, Daniel was called to the stage to say a few words about his father's legacy. He spoke about discipline, about ambition, about carrying the Whitmore name forward. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he mention the years before the money. As he stepped down, Victoria reached for his arm instinctively, possessively, and in that moment, I knew something else. She thought she was stepping into a finished story. She didn't realize she was walking into a legal storm. 2 days later, the $6 million landed in his account. I know because he checked his banking app at breakfast and exhaled like he'd won the lottery. "Transfer confirmed," he murmured. And there it was, the moment. "Congratulations," I said. He nodded, distracted. "I'll be meeting with the investment team this afternoon." "Using all of it?" I asked casually. "Most of it. It's smarter to scale aggressively." Scale aggressively, with money he believed was untouchable. He didn't know Amelia had already filed a financial disclosure request. He didn't know we documented every contribution I made to the business. He didn't know if he poured that inheritance into the company, he'd be blending it with a marital asset. And once blended, it wasn't just his anymore. The official divorce mediation was scheduled for the following Monday. He assumed it would be brief, quick signatures, polite smiles, clean break. On Sunday night, he knocked on the bedroom door. "I think we should keep this respectful tomorrow," he said. "I agree," I replied. He hesitated. "You'll be taken care of." There it was again, that patronizing tone, as if I were a dependent, not a partner. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you remember the night your first investor pulled out?" He frowned slightly. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I stayed up until 3 rewriting your pitch deck." He shifted uncomfortably. "And the next week, you secured funding." "That was years ago," he said dismissively. "Yes," I agreed, "it was. But the law doesn't forget years ago, and neither do I." Monday morning arrived cold and gray. We sat across from each other in a glass-walled conference room. Amelia beside me, Daniel's solicitor beside him, papers neatly arranged, professional, controlled. Daniel gave me a small, confident nod. He truly believed he was about to walk away richer in every sense. Amelia began calmly. "We're requesting full disclosure of the inheritance funds and their intended allocation." Daniel's solicitor stiffened. "That's separate property." Amelia smiled faintly. "Not if it's being injected into a marital business whose foundation predates the inheritance and was materially supported by my client." Silence. Daniel looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since this started. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze without blinking. I paid attention. His confidence wavered, just slightly, but I saw it. And for the first time since he said the word divorce, he didn't look certain. He looked nervous. And that was only the beginning. Daniel had never liked losing control. Even in small things, board games, dinner reservations, holiday plans, he preferred to steer, to anticipate, to dominate quietly. But in that glass-walled conference room, control slipped. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to rattle him. His solicitor adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. The inheritance is clearly documented as separate property. Amelia folded her hands calmly. We're not disputing the source. We're disputing the integration. Daniel turned toward her. Integration? She slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial projections, emails, strategy memos, my annotations, highlighted in yellow, time-stamped, undeniable. You transferred $4.8 million into Whitmore Digital Holdings this morning, Amelia continued evenly, a company established during the marriage, a company built during the marriage, a company my client materially contributed to without compensation. Daniel's eyes snapped to me. You were spying on me? I almost laughed. No, I said softly, I was preparing. The mediator leaned forward. If the inheritance has been commingled with marital business assets, the court may consider its growth subject to division. Daniel's jaw tightened. You wouldn't, he said to me under his breath. Wouldn't what? Protect myself? Claim what I helped build? The truth settled between us like a third presence at the table. He never thought I'd fight. After mediation adjourned for review, Daniel cornered me in the corridor. This is vindictive, he hissed. No, I replied calmly. It's equitable. You're trying to take my father's money. I'm trying to protect my contribution. You didn't build that company, he snapped. I held his gaze. I wrote your first 3 proposals. Silence. I managed payroll when you couldn't afford an accountant. Silence. I covered the mortgage for 18 months. His expression shifted, not to guilt, but to calculation. That's when I understood something chilling. He wasn't angry because I was wrong. He was angry because I was effective. That evening, Victoria called. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was clipped, polished, controlled. I think we need to clarify a few misunderstandings, she said. Daniel mentioned you're escalating things unnecessarily. Unnecessarily. I saved the message. Then I did something Daniel would never expect. I called her back. She answered immediately. I thought it might be healthier if we spoke directly, I said pleasantly. There was a pause. Yes, she replied carefully. I agree. I just wanted to assure you, I continued pleasantly, that I'm not interested in Daniel emotionally anymore. Another pause. But legally, I added, I'm very interested. Her tone cooled. You're being greedy. I almost admired the simplicity of it. Greedy, I repeated gently. I spent 10 years investing unpaid labor into that business. You were his wife. Yes, I agreed. I was. And that was the problem, because wives aren't seen as investors, they're seen as supporters, and supporters are expected to step aside quietly. I don't intend to step aside, I said calmly. Her composure cracked just slightly. You can't ruin his future just because you're hurt. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not hurt. That part surprised me, but it was true. The grief had already burned out. What remained with clarity. And Victoria, I added softly, if you're planning a future with him, you should pay attention to how he handles this one. Silence. Then she hung up. The next week, Daniel's behavior shifted. The charm disappeared. The pleasantness dissolved. He became cold, transactional. Emails replaced conversations. He moved fully into the guest room. The house felt like a hotel lobby, polite and impersonal. Then came the financial report. Whitmore Digital's valuation had already increased due to the capital injection announcement. Projected growth? Exponential. Which meant one thing. If the court determined the inheritance had enhanced a marital asset, I wasn't fighting over $6 million. I was fighting over what that $6 million would become. Daniel must have realized it too, because 3 days later he made me an offer. We met in the kitchen, the same marble island. He slid a new document toward me. $1 million, he said. I didn't react. Tax-free, immediate transfer in exchange for relinquishing any claim to the business. $1 million. 10 years reduced to a payout. You're generous, I said evenly. His eyes narrowed. Take it, before legal fees eat everything. You're afraid, I observed quietly. I'm practical. No, I said, you're afraid of precedent. He didn't respond, but I saw it. He wasn't worried about money. He was worried about losing narrative. The successful entrepreneur, the legacy son, the decisive man who upgraded his life cleanly. If I won publicly, that story fractured. And men like Daniel cared deeply about their stories. That night, something unexpected happened. I found an old box in the attic while searching for archived financial paperwork. Inside were letters, handwritten, from his father to Daniel. I shouldn't have read them, but I did. Harold Whitmore wasn't affectionate, but he was strategic. One line froze me. Remember, son, marriage is partnership until it becomes liability. Always protect legacy first. My chest tightened. So this wasn't just about money. This was inheritance philosophy. Legacy over loyalty. Asset over affection. Daniel wasn't reinventing himself. He was becoming exactly what he'd been trained to be. Suddenly, this wasn't personal betrayal. It was generational programming, which made it more dangerous. 2 days before the next mediation session, Amelia called. Her tone was different, measured. Daniel's team filed an emergency motion. For what? To argue the capital injection was a loan to the company, not equity. I sat down slowly. That changes things? It complicates them, she admitted, but not fatally. He was maneuvering, trying to retroactively shield the funds, trying to rewrite the transaction. I almost admired the speed. Almost. Amelia, I asked quietly, if this goes to court, how public does it get? Very, she said. Very. Victoria's name, business dealings, financial transfers, everything dissected. Daniel valued privacy, he valued image, and he valued control, which meant he had one vulnerability left, reputation. And for the first time since this began, I saw the endgame. It wasn't about destroying him, it was about forcing him to choose, money or narrative. And I knew exactly which one he cherished most. But what I didn't know was how far he was willing to go to protect it, because the next morning I woke up to an email that made my blood run cold. Subject line, cease and desist. The email was from Daniel's legal team. Attached, a formal cease and desist letter. Accusation, defamation, financial interference, reputational harm. I read it twice, then a third time. It claimed that I had maliciously implied infidelity and financial misconduct to third parties in an effort to damage Mr. Whitmore's professional standing. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me sharpened. This wasn't defense anymore. This was intimidation. I forwarded it to Amelia immediately. She called within 5 minutes. Don't respond, she said. Calm, controlled. This is a pressure tactic. He's accusing me of defamation? Yes, she replied, because he's worried. I leaned back in the chair. He wants me scared. He wants you silent. There it was, silence. That's what he'd always relied on, my patience, my restraint, my refusal to escalate. But he forgot something crucial. I had nothing left to lose emotionally, and that made me dangerous. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. I was sitting at the dining table, the cease and desist letter printed neatly in front of me. He saw it immediately. So, he said flatly, loosening his tie, you received it. I did. It's necessary, he added. You've been talking. I spoke to one person, Victoria. His jaw tightened. You had no right. I had every right, I replied quietly. I was still your wife. He exhaled sharply. This doesn't have to be ugly. No, I agreed, it doesn't. He studied me carefully. What do you want? It was the first honest question he'd asked in weeks. I want acknowledgement, I said. Of what? That I built that company with you. You supported it, he corrected. I held his gaze. Daniel, I said softly, if I had left 3 years in, would it exist today? He didn't answer, because he knew. The early years were fragile, investors hesitated, contracts fell through, and every time he nearly quit, I steadied him. But support doesn't show up on balance sheets, and that was his advantage. The following week, things escalated publicly. Whitmore Digital announced a massive expansion initiative, press release, interviews, Daniel on LinkedIn discussing a bold new era of independent leadership. Independent. The word felt surgical. Amelia sent me the article. They're shaping narrative, which means court pressure is working. I scrolled through the comments. Congratulations flooded in. Industry praise. Old acquaintances applauding his vision. Not one mention of the decade before the inheritance. Not one mention of the wife beside him. I closed the app slowly. That was when I made the decision. If he wanted narrative control, I would bring truth into the light, but strategically, not emotionally. I met Amelia at her office the next morning. I want to file a formal motion for forensic accounting, I said. She raised an eyebrow. That's aggressive. So is a cease and desist. She considered me for a long moment. It will open everything, she warned. Every transaction, every communication related to capital allocation. Good, I replied, because if Daniel wanted to paint me as vindictive, let the numbers speak. Amelia nodded slowly. All right, but once we do this, settlement becomes harder. I don't want easy, I said. I want fair. 2 days later, Victoria appeared at the house, unannounced. Daniel wasn't home. I opened the door to find her standing there, immaculate as ever, but her eyes betrayed tension. We need to talk, she said. I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, scanning the hallway like it still belonged to me. It did, in more ways than one. She sat on the edge of the sofa. This forensic accounting request, it's excessive. Are you his spokesperson now? I asked calmly. Her composure flickered. You're damaging investor confidence. Ah, there it was. Not love, not concern, risk. He shouldn't have mixed personal betrayal with business expansion, I replied evenly. You're punishing him. No, I said quietly. I'm protecting myself. She leaned forward. You think this makes you powerful. I tilted my head. I think accountability makes people uncomfortable. Silence settled between us. Then she said something unexpected. He told me you were emotional. I almost smiled. And he didn't mention you were strategic. For a brief second, I saw it. Doubt. Not about me, about him. If he's willing to erase 10 years with you, be very certain he won't rewrite you, too. She stood abruptly. You're trying to scare me. No, I replied. I'm offering perspective. She left without another word, and for the first time I wondered, was she starting to see it? That evening, Daniel stormed into the house. You ambushed her. She came here. You're manipulating this. Daniel, I said calmly, you filed a legal threat against me. You're forcing my hand. Good, I said evenly. He froze. Forcing his hand meant exposure, and exposure was the one thing he feared more than losing money. You don't understand what's at stake, he snapped. Oh, I do, I replied. Legacy, reputation, control. You could walk away with $1 million, he said again. Why aren't you satisfied? Because satisfaction implies I was paid fairly, and I wasn't. Because you're not negotiating, I said quietly. You're erasing. His face hardened. You're not the woman I married. No, I agreed. I'm not. And for the first time, he looked unsure. The forensic accounting motion was approved. Daniel's legal team objected, but the judge ruled transparency necessary due to commingling concerns, which meant one thing. Every transfer, every valuation shift, every internal memo discussing the inheritance strategy would be reviewed. 2 days later, Amelia called me. Her voice was calm, but slower. "We found something," she said. My pulse quickened. "What?" "There's an internal email chain between Daniel and his CFO, and they discussed delaying the divorce filing until after capital integration to minimize spousal leverage." Silence swallowed the room. He had planned the timing, calculated it, structured it, not because he fell out of love, but because he thought he could outmaneuver me financially. My chest tightened, not with heartbreak, but clarity. This was never about incompatibility, it was about optimization. He optimized his exit and underestimated mine. Amelia's voice came through again. "There's more." "What?" "There are draft equity allocation documents." My breath slowed. Allocating shares to Victoria before the divorce was finalized, before settlement, before disclosure. He wasn't just leaving, he was repositioning assets, shielding, reassigning. I closed my eyes, not in pain, in focus, because now it wasn't about contribution, it was about intent, and intent changes everything in court, but it also changes something else, trust. And once intent is exposed publicly, reputation doesn't just crack, it fractures. And Daniel Whitmore had just handed me the evidence. He just didn't know it yet. The following morning, I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, mind sharp. Amelia was already there, scanning documents spread across the table like a general planning a siege. "Good morning," I said, settling into the chair opposite her. "Morning," she replied. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed excitement. "We've compiled everything: emails, financial records, timestamps, internal memos. Every move Daniel made regarding the inheritance and company expansion is documented." I nodded slowly. "And Victoria?" "She's anxious," Amelia said. "Her counsel called ours. They're concerned about what she'll inherit if the court rules commingled assets. She didn't anticipate this level of exposure." I smiled faintly. That tiny flicker of doubt in her voice was satisfying. Victoria thought she was untouchable, that she could step into a prearranged life of wealth without acknowledging the groundwork that I had laid. I'd underestimated no one, and I never would. By late afternoon, the first official forensic accounting report arrived. Amelia and I pored over the spreadsheets and line items. Every transaction, every transfer, and every investment was meticulously documented. Daniel's supposedly separate inheritance funds had in fact been integrated directly into Whitmore Digital's growth initiatives, funds that had increased the value of an enterprise I had helped build from scratch. "I counted it all," Amelia said, pointing to highlighted sections. "Your contributions are undeniable, and the timing? He tried to mask the integration until after the inheritance landed, but the court can see it clearly." I felt a surge of vindication, but I reminded myself to remain composed. This wasn't personal gratification, it was strategy. "Next step?" I asked. "We file the motion to challenge the commingling formally. This will ensure that any increase in valuation linked to his inheritance is subject to equitable division." I nodded. Perfect. Later that evening, Daniel returned home. His expression was tight. He didn't smile, didn't comment on dinner, didn't ask how my day went. He simply poured himself a glass of whiskey and retreated to the study. I watched him go and felt no sadness, only resolve. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and legacy would shield him from consequences. He had underestimated me completely. The next morning, the first legal documents were served. Daniel's office called immediately, insisting on an emergency meeting. I let the call go to voicemail and forwarded the documents to Amelia. "Don't answer," she instructed. "Let him come to you." By late afternoon, he arrived at the house. He didn't knock, he didn't announce himself, he just appeared in the hallway, posture rigid, eyes calculating. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. He ignored the greeting. "You're pushing this too far," he said, voice low. "This is unnecessary. We can settle quietly." "I thought we already tried settling quietly, and look where that got us." He shook his head. "You're ruining everything. My reputation, the company, our future." "Your future," I corrected, "not ours." For a moment he froze, his lips pressed tightly together, jaw working as if chewing over my words. "You think you're clever," he said finally. "I don't think, Daniel. I know." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you realize how much you're risking?" "Yes, which is why I'm careful." For the first time, I saw real uncertainty flash across his face. His hand twitched near his phone, as if considering a call he'd normally make without hesitation. And then he did something I didn't expect. He left. Not storming, not slamming doors, just left, as if retreating to rethink his approach. 2 days later, Amelia called. She had a new development. "What?" I asked, leaning forward. "There's an internal company email chain. Daniel sent directives to senior staff regarding asset reallocation, shares that were earmarked for Victoria, adjustments to equity distribution, all before the divorce documents were filed. He's trying to retroactively secure her position and shield himself." I let out a quiet laugh. This was textbook overreach. He had assumed he could manipulate the narrative without consequences. "And you can use it?" I asked excitedly. "Absolutely," Amelia replied. "It shows intent, premeditation, and it's binding in court." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and cold anticipation. Daniel's meticulous planning, which he thought gave him the upper hand, had become the weapon we would wield. The next confrontation was inevitable. I prepared for it carefully. Dinner at home, neutral conversation, eyes open, posture confident. Daniel arrived, polite, almost disarmingly normal. He attempted casual conversation about the company, the weather, even trivialities from our early married life. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there for clarity. "Daniel," I said after a moment, "we need to talk about the inheritance allocation." His face tightened imperceptibly. "I thought Amelia would handle that." "I'm handling it with her," I corrected, "because this isn't just about money, it's about fairness." He paused, scanning my face, clearly weighing his options. "I offered you a settlement," he said cautiously. "1 million," I said, letting the words hang, "but the court will see the full scope now, and Victoria." His eyes flickered. Recognition. Panic, maybe even regret. "You're escalating unnecessarily," he said, voice low. "No," I said calmly, "you're underestimating the consequences. You've taken steps assuming your narrative would shield you. It won't." Later that evening, the most unexpected thing happened. A message arrived from Victoria. Her tone was tentative, almost fragile. "You're making Daniel nervous. I think I need to reconsider my position. He's not the man I thought he was." I stared at the message. For the first time, she saw what I had always known. Daniel was a man whose loyalty had limits defined by money and legacy, not love or partnership. I didn't respond. Silence was more effective than any words I could type. 2 days before the next court session, Amelia and I finalized our strategy. Every document, every email chain, every note of contribution was cataloged and cross-referenced. The goal wasn't just financial fairness, it was full acknowledgement of my role in building the empire that Daniel assumed he could claim entirely for himself. As I left Amelia's office, I felt a quiet triumph. The storm wasn't over, far from it, but the first lightning bolt had struck, and now Daniel would have to choose, continue with his manipulation and risk complete exposure, or negotiate fairly, acknowledging that the foundation he stood on wasn't solely his. That night, I stared at our wedding photos, memories of laughter, of struggle, of shared victories. I didn't feel bitterness, I felt clarity. 10 years of partnership had not been erased. They had been preserved in meticulous documentation, legal strategy, and quiet observation. And the best part? Daniel didn't realize it yet, because while he was focused on wealth, control, and image, I had been focused on truth, strategy, and patience. And truth, carefully applied, always finds its way to the surface. The next morning, Daniel called. His voice, normally confident, was slightly strained. "We need to settle this," he said. "Finally," I replied softly, "you understand what's at stake now." "Yes," he admitted, almost grudgingly, "I understand." And in that admission, the first real crack appeared, the first sign that his meticulously constructed narrative was faltering. The next week would be decisive, and I was ready. Monday morning arrived with a brittle chill that matched the tension in the Whitmore household. Daniel didn't greet me at breakfast, didn't make small talk, didn't even glance my way. Instead, he poured himself black coffee, skimmed through the morning emails, and retreated to the study. The quiet was deliberate, a calculated attempt to assert dominance in his own home. But I wasn't intimidated. Amelia arrived mid-morning with a stack of documents, her presence calm but commanding. She laid them out meticulously on the dining table, a battlefield mapped in paper. "This is everything we need for the court," she said. "Every email chain, every financial statement, every internal memo that indicates the integration of inheritance funds into the marital business. We're ready." I studied the stack. Each folder a testament to the years I had invested, hours of unpaid work, sleepless nights, relentless attention to detail, and now, finally, proof that Daniel's assumption that he could quietly claim it all for himself was flawed. "Are we exposing him fully?" I asked. "Yes," Amelia replied firmly, "and you'll remain completely untouchable. Every document points back to him and his actions, not yours." That afternoon, Daniel called. His voice was tight, measured. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm listening," I replied evenly. "I've reviewed the documents," he began, careful not to sound alarmed, though I could hear the tension in his words. "I don't think you understand the implications of escalating this. The public scrutiny, investor concerns, it could destroy the company. Or it could finally reflect the truth," I said quietly. "The truth about what we built together and how much I contributed. You underestimated that, Daniel. You always did." There was silence on the line, followed by a long exhale. "You're ruthless," he muttered. "I'm prepared," I said, "and you should be too." Over the next few days, the legal strategy intensified. Forensic accounting reports were submitted to the court. Amelia guided me through every detail, explaining how each transaction and email demonstrated intent to integrate inheritance funds into a marital asset, assets I had materially contributed to. Daniel's legal team was scrambling. They tried to reclassify the transfers as loans, as temporary allocations, as anything but integration. But the documents were clear, meticulous, irrefutable, and every attempt they made to obscure the truth only highlighted the transparency of my evidence. Victoria, meanwhile, began to panic. The carefully curated future she had envisioned, stepping into Daniel's life post-inheritance, was now clouded by uncertainty. Her calls went unanswered. Her counsel reached out, but Amelia managed every communication, ensuring that Victoria's position was clear. She was now fully aware that Daniel's actions were under scrutiny. Then came the mediation session that would set the tone for the next phase of the divorce proceedings. The room was neutral, glass-walled, bright with morning light. Daniel entered first, impeccably dressed, eyes scanning the room. I followed moments later, calm, poised, and confident. Amelia sat beside me, Daniel's solicitor beside him. Victoria's lawyer hovered at the edge of the room, anxiety barely concealed. The mediator began with standard pleasantries before turning to the heart of the matter. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, we're here to review the financial integration and distribution regarding Whitmore Digital and the inheritance. Let's start with documentation. Amelia presented the evidence. Each email, memo, bank transfer, and time-stamped document were laid out in a sequence that told an undeniable story. Every attempt Daniel made to mask the integration was systematically exposed. The room grew quiet as she spoke, each word deliberate and precise. Daniel shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. He glanced at me once, as if hoping my composure would falter, but it didn't. During a brief recess, I found myself alone in the hallway. Daniel approached quietly. "You really planned this all," he said, voice low. "3 weeks before you even filed the motion, you had it all mapped out." "I observed," I said simply. "I prepared. I anticipated your moves." "You're ruthless," he muttered, almost in awe. "No," I said softly, "I'm careful, and you underestimated me." His jaw clenched. "This could ruin everything, my reputation, the company." "Only if you continue to ignore the truth," I replied. "Otherwise, it's just fairness, equity, recognition of what was already yours, but also what belongs to me." He looked at me for a long moment, a mixture of frustration, fear, and perhaps grudging respect. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the silence to settle. After mediation resumed, the discussion moved to Victoria's future with Daniel. Amelia gently yet firmly highlighted how prearranged equity allocations to her were contingent upon the marital business being unaffected by my legal claims. In other words, if the court ruled that the inheritance funds had been integrated into a marital asset, Victoria's prospective stake was now uncertain. Her face grew pale. Daniel shifted uneasily beside her. The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, I realized that the carefully constructed triangle, Daniel, Victoria, and the inheritance, was beginning to unravel. By the end of the session, it was clear that Daniel was facing 2 impossible choices: continue his aggressive stance and risk full legal exposure, or negotiate a fair settlement that acknowledged my contributions. For the first time in weeks, I saw hesitation in his eyes. Not anger, not bravado, hesitation. Amelia and I left the building without speaking. We didn't need to. The groundwork had been laid, the first real cracks had appeared, and the next legal filings would determine the course of the final outcome. That night at home, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. 10 years of investment, of loyalty, of emotional and financial labor had led to this point. And while the storm was far from over, the tide had shifted. Daniel's carefully constructed narrative, wealthy, decisive, untouchable, was now vulnerable. Every document, every carefully preserved email, every detail of contribution I had documented now served as both shield and weapon. Victoria had seen cracks in the armor, Daniel had seen doubt in my composure, and I had seen the opportunity to secure not just fairness, but acknowledgement. The quiet in the house that night was no longer tense, it was expectant, anticipatory. Because the next week, the final arguments, revelations, and confrontations would arrive, and I was ready. But what I didn't yet know was how far Daniel would go to protect his image, and how far I would need to go to ensure that truth prevailed. The next session promised answers, and perhaps the climax of everything we had been building toward. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and tension. I could feel it as soon as I walked through the doors, a mix of anxiety, expectation, and raw, unspoken stakes that hung in the air like smoke. Today would decide everything. Daniel followed behind, polished, composed, but I could sense the tremor beneath his calm exterior. Even the most carefully curated mask couldn't completely hide the fear he now carried. Amelia had prepared me meticulously. Every document, every timestamp, every email had been reviewed. Every possible counterargument Daniel might attempt had been anticipated and cataloged. I felt ready, not just to defend myself, but to reclaim the narrative Daniel thought he owned. We entered the courtroom. Glass panels allowed the morning sun to stream in, catching on the polished surfaces and casting long, angular shadows across the room. Daniel's attorney began with an opening statement, emphasizing the separation of inheritance from marital assets, painting the $6 million as untouchable, and attempting to frame me as opportunistic. I listened in silence, each word reinforcing my resolve. Then Amelia rose, calm, controlled. Her voice cut through the tension. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not disputing the source of the inheritance. We are disputing the commingling of funds and the intent behind these actions. Evidence clearly shows that Mr. Whitmore transferred inherited capital directly into a business built, funded, and expanded with contributions from my client, work, time, and strategy that were unremunerated and integral to the company's growth. This is not speculation. This is documented fact." She presented the email chains, the internal memos where Daniel instructed the CFO to integrate funds, to delay the divorce until after capitalization, to allocate shares to Victoria, to shield assets from me. Every word, time-stamped, highlighted in yellow, evidence of intent. Daniel's face remained stoic, but I could see it, the flicker of panic when the documents were displayed on the projector. For the first time, his carefully crafted plan seemed fragile. Victoria's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The young woman's future with Daniel, her dream of instant wealth, was now caught in the crossfire. Amelia wasn't cruel, she was strategic. The light of truth exposed everything. The courtroom murmured as the first witnesses were called. Daniel's CFO reluctantly confirmed the emails, acknowledging that directives had come from Daniel himself. Investors and accountants testified about the timing of fund transfers and the business valuations that had increased as a result. Every piece of testimony tightened the noose around Daniel's narrative. When it was my turn to speak, I rose calmly. I looked directly at Daniel for the first time in weeks, and he met my gaze, though now it was tentative, uncertain. "I contributed 10 years of my life to this company, not as a spouse, but as a partner in effort, strategy, and dedication. I never asked for recognition in public because I believed in us, in our marriage. But when inheritance was injected into a business I helped build, when plans were made to divide assets without acknowledgement of my contributions, I realized fairness requires visibility, accountability, and legal validation." I paused, letting my words settle. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was electric. Every eye was on me. Every breath seemed measured, anticipating the next revelation. I didn't act out of vengeance. I acted to preserve what is rightfully mine and to ensure transparency. This isn't personal, it's principle. 10 years of labor, innovation, and risk cannot be erased by a signature on a divorce form or the promise of a financial settlement that ignores reality. Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw the edge of panic, not fear of me, but fear of public acknowledgement of truth. Then came the bombshell. Amelia presented a series of letters from Harold Whitmore, Daniel's father, written over the years to Daniel. They outlined inheritance philosophy, control over legacy, and prioritization of assets over human relations. The judge read aloud a particularly chilling line. "Marriage is partnership only until it becomes liability. Always protect legacy first." The room fell silent. Daniel's face paled. His attorney stammered. Victoria buried her face in her hands. The narrative that Daniel had tried to control so tightly now lay exposed, raw and undeniable. I remained calm because while the letters were devastating to him emotionally, strategically, they reinforced my position legally. The court could now see intent, premeditation, and the deliberate prioritization of wealth over partnership. Outside the courtroom during a brief recess, Daniel confronted me privately in the hallway. His voice was low, tense. "You're ruining me," he whispered. "I'm showing the truth," I replied evenly. "This could destroy everything," he said. "Only if you continue to fight dishonesty," I said softly. "It's not destruction, it's accountability." He stepped back, clenching his fists. "I offered you a settlement. I tried to protect you, and you exposed it all publicly." "Not publicly, legally, strategically, responsibly, and you underestimated me." He didn't respond. He only looked at me with a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. For the first time, I saw a man stripped of control, forced to reckon with consequences he thought he could manipulate. The afternoon session resumed with more testimonies. Investors detailed how Daniel had claimed credit for growth, while internal records proved my direct influence on strategy, client acquisition, and operational management. Amelia methodically linked every transfer, every decision, and every email to establish a pattern of integration between the inheritance and the marital business. Daniel's face grew taut. His calm, composed veneer was cracking under scrutiny. His lawyer tried desperately to redirect attention, but the chain of evidence was unbroken. Every diversion he attempted only highlighted his miscalculations. Victoria remained a silent observer. I caught her eye once. There was recognition there. Not malice, not fear, but understanding. She realized that Daniel's image as decisive, untouchable, and generous was built on manipulation, concealment, and misrepresentation. The climax arrived when Amelia presented the final piece, a forensic summary showing the projected increase in company valuation directly attributable to the inheritance funds Daniel tried to shield. The numbers were irrefutable. The $6 million had grown exponentially thanks to the capital injection and the operations I had managed and enhanced. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, are you aware of this integration?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "And were you attempting to shield this from your spouse?" the judge asked. Daniel hesitated. The courtroom was silent. Then he nodded. Amelia turned to the court. "Your Honor, this establishes both intent and the material contribution of my client to the business's growth during marriage. This demonstrates that a fair settlement must account not just for direct inheritance, but for the value it added when integrated into marital assets." The judge nodded, considering the evidence. Daniel's face was pale. His perfect image, his sense of untouchability had collapsed under the weight of documented truth. After hours of deliberation, the court adjourned for the day. Daniel left first, quiet, composed outwardly, but inwardly unraveling. Victoria followed, her previous confidence eroded into uncertainty. Amelia and I remained behind, reviewing documents and ensuring every detail was prepared for the final session. That evening, I sat alone in our home. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the walls. I reflected on the months of planning, observation, and patience. Every moment, the whispers, the letters, the careful documentation had led to this point. Daniel's first cracks were visible. His narrative was no longer unassailable. And I realized something profound. This was more than a legal battle. This was a reclamation of agency, of power, and of dignity. I hadn't just fought for financial fairness. I had fought to assert that my life, contributions, and intellect mattered beyond the veneer of marriage, wealth, and legacy. The final session would determine the settlement, the public acknowledgement of contribution, and the resolution of years of manipulation. But I was ready. The storm had arrived, and I would weather it with clarity, strategy, and resolve. As night fell, I sent a single text to Victoria. Truth always surfaces. Prepare accordingly. And I knew she understood. Because for the first time, Daniel was not the only one controlling the narrative. The morning of the final court session arrived with a tense, almost electric stillness. I dressed deliberately in dark, structured clothing and radiated calm authority. Amelia had meticulously prepared every document, every timeline, every email and financial statement. Today, all the evidence we had built over months of observation, patience, and strategy would be presented to the court, and there would be no room for ambiguity. Daniel arrived first, perfectly groomed, his expression composed, but not unflinching. I could see it in his eyes, the uncertainty, the fear of exposure, the realization that he had underestimated me. Victoria followed closely behind, her posture stiff, her face carefully neutral. For the first time, I sensed her apprehension. The carefully mapped-out life she thought she was stepping into was now completely uncertain. We entered the courtroom. The air was heavy with anticipation. The judge called the session to order, and Daniel's attorney opened with the usual arguments. The inheritance was separate property, the transfers were legitimate corporate decisions, and the claims of commingling were exaggerated. Their words were practiced, rehearsed, but hollow in the face of the mountain of evidence Amelia had prepared. Amelia stood and began her presentation, calm, controlled, deliberate. Every email chain, every financial document, every internal memo demonstrating Daniel's intent to integrate inheritance funds into a business I had materially helped grow was laid bare. The room was silent as she methodically walked through the timeline, how the funds had been transferred, how shares were earmarked for Victoria, how Daniel had attempted to delay the divorce until after the capital injection. When the judge asked Daniel directly whether he had knowledge of the integration, he hesitated, his lips pressed tightly together. Finally, in a low, reluctant tone, he admitted, yes. A hush fell over the courtroom. That admission, simple, undeniable, was the crux. Every argument he had planned to rely on now collapsed. The letters from his father, previously discussed, were also presented. Harold Whitmore's philosophy was clear: prioritize legacy and assets over human relationships. The judge's eyes lingered on each line, understanding the context of Daniel's actions and intent. Victoria's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively turned to Daniel, searching for explanation. There was none to be found. The narrative she had trusted, the perfect, decisive, wealthy Daniel, was unraveling in front of her. Amelia's subtle, strategic presentation had revealed the truth that Daniel had hoped to conceal. The climax of the session came when Amelia presented the forensic accounting summary. The $6 million had been injected into Whitmore Digital, and due to my contributions, strategy, management, client acquisition, operational oversight, the value of that investment had increased exponentially. Every projected gain, every growth metric, every valuation increase was tied directly to work I had performed. Daniel could no longer claim the growth as solely his own achievement. The courtroom remained tense as Amelia concluded, "Your Honor, the evidence demonstrates that the inheritance funds cannot be considered purely separate property once commingled in a business built and enhanced during marriage by Miss Whitmore's contributions. A fair and equitable division of marital assets, including the value added through this integration, is warranted." Daniel's jaw tightened, his face pale. He had rehearsed confidence, charisma, and control, but it had all crumbled. For the first time, I saw vulnerability, not just in him, but in the empire he had believed untouchable. After hours of deliberation, the court returned. The ruling was precise. The inheritance funds, once integrated into Whitmore Digital, were partially subject to equitable division. My contributions were formally acknowledged. A settlement was ordered that not only reflected fair financial distribution, but also recognized my role in building and sustaining the business over the past decade. Daniel remained silent. His face was controlled, but his shoulders slumped slightly. Victoria sat beside him, visibly shaken. The future she had envisioned, immediate wealth, a legacy secured without effort, was now completely uncertain. Amelia turned to me afterward. "You did this with dignity and precision," she said. "You could have let anger or emotion dictate your approach, but you stayed strategic. You reclaimed your agency." I felt a quiet satisfaction, far from triumphalist joy. This was not revenge. This was justice, fairness, recognition of years of investment, loyalty, and patience. In the days that followed, Daniel retreated from public view. The company continued to grow, but now with proper acknowledgement of the contributions I had made. Victoria quietly withdrew, reassessing her involvement. The whispers in the industry began, subtle but persistent. Daniel's legacy, once unquestioned, was now clearly linked to the partnerships he had taken for granted. I returned to my life with a sense of closure. The marriage was over. The betrayal was real, but the lessons were invaluable. Observation, patience, preparation, and calm strategic action often outweigh impulsive reaction. 10 years of dedication had not been erased. They had been preserved and validated. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized the most important truth. Betrayal can feel like devastation in the moment, but it also reveals clarity. It teaches discernment. It forces accountability, not just for others, but for oneself. Daniel's choices, dictated by greed and legacy obsession, exposed him. My choices, guided by observation, strategy, and patience, preserved me. I also learned about the power of calm resolve. Anger, though tempting, can cloud judgment. Patience, documentation, and foresight become shields in situations where trust is violated. When someone you love prioritizes assets over affection, it's not enough to react emotionally. One must act deliberately, methodically, and strategically. A week later, I sat alone in our house, which now felt like a place of reflection rather than conflict. I opened an old photo album, wedding pictures, early days in the small Manchester apartment, milestones in our business. I smiled softly. Those memories weren't tarnished by the betrayal. They were reframed as evidence of resilience, contribution, and growth. I realized something profound. Betrayal is not just about loss. It is a mirror. It shows who we are, what we are capable of, and the boundaries we must protect. I had been loyal, patient, observant, and strategic. I had taken years of invisible labor and ensured it was recognized. I had transformed vulnerability into power, invisibility into acknowledgement. And the moral was clear. Life will test trust, loyalty, and patience. The people who betray will sometimes assume impunity, believing money, charm, or image can erase consequence. But truth, carefully observed and strategically presented, always surfaces. The narrative they try to control can be reclaimed by those who act with clarity, preparation, and unwavering composure. I closed the album and looked out the window. The city stretched before me, bright, indifferent, and full of possibility. I had survived the storm. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had ensured fairness, not just financially, but morally, legally, and strategically. Daniel's choices were exposed. Victoria had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and I had learned that power, patience, and meticulous strategy are more enduring than wealth alone. I smiled faintly, a sense of inner peace settling over me. Life would continue, full of challenges and opportunities, but I knew now no one could undermine the truth of my contribution. Betrayal, no matter how devastating, could be met with resilience, preparation, and resolve. And with that clarity, I stepped forward into the next chapter of my life, stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my narrative. The storm had passed, the lesson endured, the truth had prevailed.